Hello and welcome to the Orosur Mining Investor Call. My name is Josh and I will be your coordinator for today's event. Please note that this conference is being recorded and for the duration of the call, your lines will be on listen only. However, you will have the opportunity to ask questions at the end of the call. This can be done by pressing star 1 on your telephone keypad to register your question. If you require assistance at any point, please press star 0 and you will be connected to an operator. I'll now hand you over to your host, Brad George, Chief Executive, and Louis Castro, Chairman, to begin today's conference. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a nice, pleasant change to be in the same time zone just for once. So I've finally been allowed out of the Hermit Republic of Western Australia. So the way this will work, I'll give it just a short talk on where we are and where we're going. I obviously would like that to be more visual and in person, but we're not quite there yet, so maybe in a few weeks' time. I'm in London now. Louis and I are heading to South America on the weekend, where we're going to be spending about 3 weeks visiting the Orosur project in Colombia and a few other countries there where we have some advanced negotiations in place that you may hear more about, hopefully in a couple of days' time. So once we get back in a few weeks, we'll try to sort of update in a little more detail as to where things are going. I mean, I am quite cognizant that it's very hard for both of us to talk about the projects in detail, never having been there. So hopefully when we come back, we'll be able to actually know a little more. So it'll be nice to actually see the rocks. It's probably worth just sort of stepping back a few months and just imagining where we were when Louis and I joined the company in sort of middle of 2020, so roughly May. So 18 months ago, the share price was less than 2p. We had no money in the bank. The Uruguay wind down was still very much uncertain and a bit of a drag on the share price. And the Orosur project had seen no activity for almost 2 years, and people were wondering quite rightly where that was going. And since then, quite a lot has changed. We've wound Uruguay back to the point now where it's not quite done, but we are getting toward the end, and that hopefully will be off the balance sheet later this year. We raised $6 million, which gave the balance sheet a nice kick. Agnico came into the Orosur project 18 months ago with Newmont, and they reinvigorated that project and revamped it up quite quickly, drilled 10,000 metres, and injected quite a lot of money into that project, and that's now advancing toward the second phase of that joint venture. So it's been quite a busy time, and I know there's always expectation to more news flow, but I think we and the board and the staff are quite happy that we managed to do all this in the middle of a rather interesting pandemic. So full marks to all the guys in the field particularly. But just stepping, I guess, to where we are at Orosur, obviously the last few months has been a bit quiet, largely due to the handover process. I made the comment yesterday in a video interview that process was a little more complicated than we really wanted it to be because the handover had been delayed a bit longer than we all wanted, again due to COVID. Agnico wanted to come in earlier, but due to travel, they really couldn't do it, and we ended up with a far bigger operation than we wanted to be. We had 100 staff and 5 drill rigs and lots of contracts, and winding all of those things back and moving them across to Agnico was quite a complicated process, especially if we do it properly. We didn't want to leave any residual liabilities for the contracts or for labour issues. So there was quite a lot of work dotting I's and crossing T's to make sure that was done according to the book. So that was quite a good job for the legal team there. But it did mean, of course, that for a few months things did wind down. At the moment, that's largely now complete. Agnico are in control. Obviously, we just had a bit of a holiday, so that's good. There are 3 rigs on site drilling around the Orosur deposit. There are the regional teams are still working quite busily to the north and to the northwest. The problems that have plagued us in the past, or one of the problems that plagued us in the past, was that of significant delays in assay turnaround times that coming out of the lab in Lima and Peru, again largely COVID related. Those we are told are now by and large fixed. The staff are all back. The argon gas is available. The lab completed their expansion, which was an interesting time to do an expansion, but that's all done. So I'm told that the turnaround times are now really back to where they should be, which is roughly 2 weeks. Having said that, during the handover period, there was quite a long delay of no assays being submitted while the laboratory contracts were rewritten. We had to terminate our contract. Agnico did a new contract. So there's always good and bad. It's good is the assays, the rigs are turning, the assay labs are working, but we've got the residual delay now of that couple of months where there wasn't any samples going in. So it's all very positive, and certainly the feedback we get from Agnico is that they're really, now after holidays, they're going to hit this thing pretty hard. So there'll be more rigs coming in, more people, and they're really taking this quite seriously. The other point, I guess, to make out is that the joint venture agreement that we inherited does give us limited access to data. So it's a very good thing to have two of these major companies drilling on a project that they're very excited about. The downside is that we no longer are involved. I don't get daily reports. We get access to data that is required for us to meet our obligations to 4D-101. So we get all the drilling data, drilling assay data. But access to other data such as geochemistry, geophysics and things we're not going to see other than on our quarterly meetings. So the downside is the news flow is going to be a little bit out of our control. That's something we need to work on. And that's something we'll be negotiating and discussing with Agnico when we get on site in a few weeks' time. So there's always a plus and minus. The plus is this project now ramps up activity-wise very significantly. The feedback we get from Agnico Newmont is that this is really one of their key projects. Agnico particularly, they came into this project being, if memory serves, the world's 8th largest gold miner, but they're in the middle of a merger with Kirkland Lake, which will make them the 3rd biggest gold miner in the world. So they suddenly become a very hungry company. The flip side of being a big company is you've got to find a lot of gold just to stand still. So their exploration budgets have doubled, and they're looking at this project with very, very greedy eyes. So this is going to move very, very fast, and well, as fast as it can, given the limitations that exist in Colombia. But we are looking forward to a very busy year. The other main point we're looking at is the conversion of the applications to granted status. We've got roughly 200 square kilometres. About half of that is granted, and that's where all the work has been done to this point, or at least all the drilling work has been done to this point. And we've carried out a lot of mapping and sampling on the applications. The main prospects that we're very excited about are to the north. Those of you who've seen our map on the website, La Casita, we've always viewed that as being potentially a major porphyry source to all of these things, and that's a lease we want to get on as soon as possible. We've experienced significant delays in that application conversion process, again due to COVID, but most of those issues were resolved some months ago, and that process is now in train. Again, managed by Newmont, Agnico Newmont, and we look forward hopefully as soon as we can, to have those converted and move forward. So that project we've moved that forward to the point now where these companies have taken over. And that was really the point of the last 12 to 18 months, was to drill at Aptar, to prove Aptar as a deposit, and to address the issues that Agnico wanted to see addressed to allow them to get to the point to make a decision to move forward. And that was the point of 10,000 metres of drilling. That was successful, and that was then the trigger point for the handover. So now that's in the hands of the big boys, and we sit back and enjoy the ride. As I said, once we're on site in a few weeks' time, we'll be able to provide more information from first-hand experience, and we can report back with some more details of where that's going. We've made the comments some months ago, or back in July last year, that we're looking at new projects, and we announced a non-binding MOU or LOI on a tin project in Brazil. That has not yet gone to final completion. We're at the advanced stages of the joint venture negotiations, or at least the dotting I's and crossing T's in the contracts. And again, we hope to have that to the point all going well, where we can announce the signing in, well, let's call it imminently. And there are other projects that we're looking at around South America that are of a similar vein in various commodities. And we'll, again, talk about those during our visits over the next couple of weeks. Now, the point, I guess the question to make is, well, two questions. Well, why do it? If you've got one good project, then why go to other projects? And, well, the first answer is, well, because we can. With Agnico taking over Ansar, we have the operational capacity now to go and look at other projects. We obviously have the balance sheet strength to do so. So using or leveraging those capacities to expose, or us, the company, and you, the shareholders, to the opportunities is something very much worth doing. It also, we don't wish to downplay the potential of Ansar, which is very exciting, but it's always nice to have some diversification. We want to expose ourselves to a range of projects to maximise our chances. We want to expose ourselves to a range of countries to minimise any particular issues that may arise in any particular one country. And I'm also of the mind, at least personally, that we want to diversify across a couple of different commodities. We don't want to go galloping off into sort of unpronounceable rare earths, other things, but commodities that I like, commodities that we know, commodities that are metallurgically reasonably simple, and commodities where the pricing mechanism is well understood. And tin was one of those that appealed to me. It's probably one of the more significant but unloved metals that is going to play an ever-increasing role in the battery space, if you want to call it that. But it's a metal that gets very little news flow. It's a reasonably small market. Its supply side, well, its demand is inexorably increasing. It's the one metal that you just simply have to have. It's all of your lithium and cobalt and rare earths have to be soldered together, and that's what you use. That's what tin is for. But its supply side is very, very fragile. It's dominated by the hard rock mines of China and by the ageing and increasingly unreliable alluvial mines of Southeast Asia, with some production coming out of Brazil and a few other places. So it's one of those metals that's seeing very little attention. But we take a view that this project has the potential to be quite exciting in Brazil. So we'll work back there. The other question I get to new projects is how. We are cognizant that we don't want to be galloping off onto tangents until we've got some runs on the board in terms of Uruguay and both Ansar. So Uruguay, as I said, is becoming very close to the end now. And having handed over Ansar and having successfully met those hurdles over the last 18 months, we feel comfortable now that we've got a very firm basis of one very good, high-quality advanced project that's progressing off balance sheet, funded by a major. And that gives us a certain flexibility to look at other projects that perhaps other junior companies couldn't do. And that's our thinking, is to look at projects that are maybe slightly earlier stage that other juniors would look at. Simply being a grassroots explorer is a very difficult thing for juniors to do. Funding is very difficult to achieve. But because we have an advanced project, we have the ability to create a more balanced portfolio of Ansar being advanced, effectively resource drilling. We're looking at some earlier stage grassroots work, and we'll look at also perhaps a more middle stage walk-up drill target project that we can fit in the middle. So we're trying to balance our portfolio in terms of commodity, in terms of geography, and in terms of exploration stage. But all of the projects we're looking at are very key criteria of having very large land holdings, very low or zero entry cost, and projects to which we can add value very cheaply, very quickly. I think what's key is projects that give us the optionality to do various things. It's something like the kiss of death for a junior is to have a project with one binary outcome. If you do this and the outcome is A or B, is that you really want projects that as they progress in the exploration stage, you've got options available to progress by yourself, to do a JV with a major, to do a range of things. And the key issue here is the right commodity, the right large land package in the right location and do good work. So it's a long process. We've been working on these new projects now for over 12 months, and we now think we're at a point where we're about to sign our first, and we'll look at a few more in possibly a few weeks or months' time. So the company, as I said, is a very different company to that which we inherited in May 18 months ago. The liabilities are now largely wound back. There's money in the bank. We've handed the keys to our key project to Agnico and Newmont, two of the world's three largest gold miners, and that now frees us up to look at new projects in some of the key mineralized areas of South America that I think, well, certainly is our plan that sets us up to be, I would like to think, one of the preferred explorers of South America. We're very focused on key projects, high quality projects, but not necessarily wedded to moving things forward in toward mines. We want to add value, and then look at every stage of adding value, look for what is the best next step, be that monetization, joint venture, or progressing alone. So it's a constant reassessment of what is the best thing to do to add shareholder value. So it's a long process. It's hard to explain, and I appreciate that it doesn't always result in the rapidity of news flow that investors want in this age of social media. But as much as social media is very instant, mining and exploration still takes as long as it's always taken. So we are cognizant of having multiple projects. We then have the ability to maintain the news flow and activity level to keep ourselves front and centre as one of the more preferred explorers. So that's sort of a brief snapshot of where we are. As I said, we're back in a few weeks' time. We're going to get malaria, and we'll give a presentation webinar in much more detail of where things are and all those new projects. So I'm happy to take a few questions from the floor. There's a few that were pre-submitted, and I'll address those first, and we can hand over to the audience to sling some arrows. Now, the first of these questions I've largely addressed. With Agnico and Newmont now in control, what will this mean for news flow? As I said, it will, as written in the JV, it may slow, and we have some ability to negotiate this, and that will be one of our priorities when we meet face to face in Medellin in a couple of weeks' time. We have a sense that not only do we have a requirement to meet the 4101 requirements of the TSX, but obviously we also have a duty to you, the shareholders, to make sure that we're able to communicate at a pace that we control rather than they control. The issue here obviously is that what is material to us is not material to them. Agnico and Newmont have no interest in announcing exploration results. They're not material to them, but they are to us. So we need to make sure that we are getting access to data at a rate that allows that's more in tune with what your needs are, and also gives us a greater degree of control to determine what is or isn't material. So watch this space. The next question, what happened next with the joint venture? We are currently in the final year of phase one. Phase one was a 4-year program. Our anniversary date of the JV is September the 6th every year. So we've got 8 months to go. In this 12-month period we're in, Agnico Newmont must spend $4 million in order to meet their obligations, or pay us in lieu, but they're well on track to meeting that $4 million well in advance. Now, at the end of that period in September, they then have the choice to move into the formal stage of the joint venture. As things currently stand, they operate the project, but we own everything 100%. So September this year, we move into phase 2, where we form a new company in Colombia, and the project is moved across to that company, and the shareholding is divided up 51 to Agnico Newmont, 49 to us, and a new company is formed. That would also involve an option payment to Orosur of $2 million upon that decision to progress. Phase 2 would then be another 4 years, during which time $20 million must be spent, $4 million per year, plus a $4 million spend that's discretional, that Agnico can spend as they wish, but it must be spent. So $20 million over the following 4 years. at the end of which they need to produce a preliminary feasibility study, which by definition requires a resource. So we'll work toward that. After that 4 years, we then move into the definitive feasibility study, and that's another 4-year period, but there's no money involved. It's whatever is required to move toward definitive feasibility. So that's locked in, and those times are quite generous. And it all, of course, depends, and it obviously can be accelerated, but it all depends somewhat upon the outcome. So we'll assess that as we go, but the joint venture is quite positive in our favour, and if it all goes to completion, we end up with a 25% residual holding in the major asset. How are we going with the application conversions? What has been the delay? Well, the delay, as with all delays, has been COVID. There are several factors with the applications that created delays. One of which was the conversion process, among many things, requires community meetings to be held. Not community votes, but community meetings to explain the process. And those have all been cancelled due to COVID, but they're back on track now, so we can begin that process. The other issue had been a forest reserve that had been flapped over some of our applications some years ago that we felt was incorrect because it did significantly impinge upon some of the applications in a way that we felt was quite serious. We had worked with the Environmental Authority over a couple of years to push that boundary back, and that had been quite successful, and that we'd all agreed on a new boundary. But again, COVID had prevented that new boundary from being officially ratified. Again, there's a formal process required to move that from being informally agreed to being formally agreed. And again, COVID meant that all of the government departments simply were unable to work. So as with the community issues, that was finally resolved just months ago, and now the application conversion process has begun. Again, being run by Agnico and Newmont, and we don't have exact details of how that's going, but we expect in the next couple of weeks or months we may begin to see some movement there. And certainly Agnico are pushing quite hard as they see these as some of the more exciting parts of the project. Now, the final pre-submitted question: are we examining more advanced projects such as early stage? Oh, sorry, I missed the question. My apologies. Are we looking at projects in Colombia, given that we're already there? Yes, we are. That's an interesting question. Obviously, being in Colombia, we have a very small presence there, but we have a commercial presence. We have some people with expertise. So our entry costs have already been borne, and therefore looking at new projects in Colombia is a reasonably simple thing to do, given that it's not going to cost us much. Colombia, however, is quite a complicated place. As I mentioned yesterday, it's quite an expensive place. The rates and rents of mining licenses are quite high compared to surrounding countries, so it's reasonably costly, and rugged terrain makes it an expensive place to work. So we are quite cautious and not overcommitting ourselves. In Colombia, the last couple of years, most of the interesting exploration ground in that mid-Cauca belt, stretching from Buritica through Ansar down to the south, had been blocked off by the government and deemed to be strategic and prohibited from new applications, with a view to those lands being auctioned off, we think, later this year to the highest bidder. They are trying to attract in some very serious companies. Now, that's likely to be well looked at by the majors, given what we're seeing coming out of this ground now with Buritica and other projects. The majors are certainly looking at this. And that might make it difficult for us to compete. But what's been interesting is that after that, those blocks or those land was blocked off for being strategic, other blocks of land began to become vacant as local companies pulled out and couldn't meet their obligations. We've had a policy from day one, really, is that our geologists there were instructed that every morning they get up and they have their cornflakes and coffee, and then go and check the system and see if any land has become available overnight, which is just, in my view, standard practice for any exploration company. And we've begun to see a number of very interesting applications or leases becoming available for claiming, particularly the last 6 months, near Ansar, next to Ansar, adjacent to major projects of Anglo Gold. And some very nice projects or very nice land available here and there. We put our hand up for some of this land, and we've made some applications that is currently being assessed. We do need in Colombia to demonstrate some financial capacity. So those things are being looked at now. So there are no guarantees, but we have our fingers crossed that in coming months we might find ourselves the proud owners of some fairly major new land packages in Colombia that could be interesting. So again, watch this space. Last question, are we examining more advanced projects such as early stage production? The short answer is no. The longer answer is, well, it depends what you mean and what we see. The issue I have here is that whenever we look at a new project, be it exploration or production, that we're looking at buying or JVing, the question I always ask is, well, if it's so good, why is it for sale? And if I don't get a good answer, then I'm not interested. And generally speaking, from my experience, is when you look at more advanced projects, they're either very expensive or there's something amiss with them that just doesn't quite gel. That, you know, if this is so good, then why is this company putting up for sale? So unless I know what that reason is, and unless I feel that we have some ability to do better what the previous guys couldn't do, then I'm always reluctant to move forward. So we do look at these things, and I'm not saying no, but most of what we looked at in terms of late stage exploration projects or production issues, there's always something there that just makes you wonder that there's something smelly. So we are looking, but in general, there are no lack of these things around the world. The world's full of them, and they're available for a reason. And generally, that reason is something I don't want to be involved in. So that's the final question that's been pre-submitted. So I'll hand back to Josh, perhaps, to see what else is out there.
Thank you very much. If you would like to ask a question or make a contribution on today's call, please press star 1 on your telephone keypad now, please. And please stand by while we collect your questions.
Right, we're back. So we had a question related to samples, and I did address that to some extent. Are there samples in the lab, and what's the timing? Now, the short answer is yes, there are samples in the lab. We have 3 drill rigs running. A drill rig would be expected to generate, say, 30 metres a day. That's probably on the order of 40 to 50 samples. So we're looking at over 100 samples a day that are being produced. My understanding is, yes, they're all in the lab. I did make the point that there was a bit of a gap in time with no samples being submitted while the contracts were handed over. And there would have been a significant, as a result, a backlog of samples that would have been delivered to the lab after that contract was signed, and with those new ones coming in every day. So, yes, there are lots of samples there, but I don't know how many. And this is where we fall into the fact now that we don't have that information available to us on a daily basis. So I don't know what's in the lab. I don't know when was in the lab. I don't know what the turnaround time is, other than Agnica telling me that they're back on track now and they're looking at a 2-week turnaround, which is basically on par with what we expect. The way it will work is that when a hole gets all of the assays back and it's complete, then we get access to that information. The way it normally works is that because you've got 3 rigs or more rigs running at a time, assays are going into the lab on batches once a week. A truck goes off, so we're getting a bit of this hole back, a bit of that hole back. They're coming back in small pieces, so it can take some time to get a complete hole back as it comes back in small batches, and then we need to deal with the fact that the standard gold assay technique, fire assay, has a reliable upper limit of 10 grams a tonne. Anything over 10 grams has to go back for a different kind of finish, what we call a gravimetric finish. So essentially a re-assay, if you like. And we, of course, as we've seen in the past, we are seeing a lot of assays over 10 grams a tonne. So which means that there's an extra couple of weeks as these assays go back and we get the final numbers. So it can take some time, depending upon the results, to get, and in fact, somewhat ironically, the better the hole, the longer it takes, as we have to get all the re-assays for high grade done. So the way it will work is that once we get the full hole back and everything has been re-assayed, then we get the data from Agnico, not before. Which is not the way I would like to do it, but that's what the JV says. So that doesn't impact on news flow because that's ultimately when we would announce anyway. Now, we can't announce until an entire hole has been completed because that's the rules of 4D101. So, yes, they're coming because I know that's happening, but I can't give you the numbers. But there are a lot of samples in the lab now, and I would suggest that would mean that we're not too far away. Okay, we have a question related to our admittedly rather poor website. When's that being updated and various things? We concur. The website is clunky. It's old. It dates back to the production days. It doesn't work well on mobile devices, so on and so forth. We have rewritten a new website, and I've promised multiple times to have it up and running. And it's all largely done. The issue we had is that we possibly jumped the gun a little bit, and I included the Brazilian project in that new website in expectation that we'd be able to sign that off a bit earlier than it was taken. So that's been delayed somewhat, and as a result, I didn't want to go back and rewrite the website to remove that and then rewrite it again to put it back in. So it's purely a delay on things that are related to joint ventures. The website's done. Once we're a little more comfortable with the content, that will be up in hopefully in a couple of weeks' time. So it is done. It's just a question of getting ready to put it up. The presentation, yes, that will be rewritten. We still a lot in there from the previous history, and obviously one of the things we'll be doing in our visit over the next few weeks is to get a lot more meat from Ansar and a lot more first-hand knowledge of what's on the ground. So there will be a new gleaming presentation done when we're back in a couple of weeks' time. Okay, we're back. We have two final questions, which I'll try to combine into the one answer because they are somewhat related, and they relate to, I guess, what happens next for that tar, particularly in rich prospects. Now, obviously, it is subject to the conversion process, so where we go next does depend upon the conversion. But in terms of what is geologically the highest priority, then I noted recently on Twitter, and those of you saw, we have a neighbouring company, Royal Road Minerals, which has some licences just to the northwest of us. And they drilled a hole a month ago, I think, just next to our licences, which came back at 303 metres of, I think, 1.6 grams per tonne effective equivalent. Now, what that was, and we've looked at the data, and it's quite nice to have neighbours that do that because you can look at what they've got and where they got it and what that means for you. And that was drilled on what they think was a small porphyry just off to the northwest. And we've looked at some data, and I'll try to show this data in the next presentation. We have all the airborne data over that license. We know what they drilled, and they drilled a small porphyry. Now that looks to be perhaps a smaller neighbouring cousin to what we think is the main intrusion at La Cecita. Now, I'll be easier if I had a map in front of me, but I don't. So, due north of Aptar, we move into the La Cecita, what we think is a porphyry source. It has a very large potassic alteration anomaly, which we see from the air. The rock samples over that look very exciting, and structurally, that sits in exactly the right place. We have a major sort of southwest to northeast fault, the Aragon Fault, on which Aptar sits, and that whole fault seems to be mineralised. And there's other things along there that we quite like. We go to the northeast of Aptar. We cross over into the application where we have Jesuitas, which looks like a repetition of Aptar, yet to be drilled. And then we move into the northeast to our granted license in the northeast, and we've got Pepas and Pepino, where we'll be mapping extensively over the last 12 months, where we're seeing lots of very high grade and the right kind of rocks in the rivers and the creeks. And that's looking very exciting. The difficulty with that northeastern area, Pepas and Pepino, is that it's quite rugged terrain. And it's very exciting, but there'll be a bit of work required to get access for the drill rig. So there'll be some bulldozing at tracks. We may even need to get helicopters involved. So there's going to be quite a lot of readiness work required to enable us to get the machinery in there, which is being undertaken now. So that one's a bit of a, well, not a slow burn, but it just needs a bit of work to get the machinery in there. But they're looking at probably 15 kilometres of strike in that northeastern application that just looks to be, I'm saying all mineralised, but mineralised to a very significant degree all the way along. So that's very interesting. We move a bit to the west to La Cita, and that's attractive for two reasons. One is it looks to be possibly very big. The anomaly from the air that we see there is multiple times bigger than what Royal Road had drilled. It looks to be the granddaddy of all the little things around that you know, it could be, and I, inverted commas, could be. It's the right thing in the right place, and it looks big. It's also appealing because we're up on a plateau now, and therefore the terrain's a lot easier to get around. We've come out of the Cauca River Valley. We're up on, you know, reasonably, not flat, but flattish terrain, easy to get to. So determined by which application gets granted first, La Cita, at least we're told by Agnico, will be their absolutely number one priority. Because it has potential to be the sort of thing, the sort of scale that these big companies need. And that's probably the key point here, is that, you know, big companies need big deposits. You know, when you've got number one, number three in the world, you know, they're not going to even look at this for less than 5 million ounces. So they need to start with the big things first, and that's their key target. So La Cita's number one if we can get there first, and then we'll be looking at, but if the conversion process is somewhat delayed, then in the meantime we'll begin work at Pina Pepas because it has been granted. So it's somewhat a question about when we get some feedback about the conversion process in the next couple of weeks. Those decisions will be made. So we'll wait and see.